Good afternoon, everybody. I am so thrilled to be here today, so honored and humbled to be here at the LULAC National Convention. You know, I've spent a significant amount of time in my career in politics, and I'm aware that LULAC is a nonpartisan organization. But here in New Mexico in Albuquerque, when someone asks you red or green, I know the answer is always Christmas. I'm so thrilled today to honor the Department of the Air Force awardees, but first I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about my mission, my job, and what I do every single day in the Pentagon on behalf of the 700,000 airmen, guardians of the United States Space Force, and our department's civilians, and why diversity and inclusion matters, and why it matters to me, why it matters to the department, why it matters to the Secretary of Defense, why it matters to the President of the United States, and more importantly, why it matters to the American people. To me, diversity is a war-fighting imperative. We are now 75 years after President Truman integrated the armed forces, and the Air Force was 1 year old at that time. The Secretary of the Air Force, the first Secretary of the Air Force, went to the President Truman and said, "I can't build a force that's combat lethal if we're to remain segregated." We're now 50 years into the all-volunteer force. And yet when I was growing up, 40% of Americans had a parent who had served. And today, that number is less than 13%. Many of our recruiting challenges, which you've heard about, come from an economy with record low unemployment, record high wage growth, but fundamentally a lack of familiarity with what the military does. And so part of my mission, part of my mandate, is to take proactive steps to make a difference. If we do not deliberately increase the propensity to serve among the fastest growing and expanding demographic groups in our nation, we risk the future of the all-volunteer force. By 2050, 54% of our population will comprise currently underrepresented groups, and 1/3 of that will be Hispanic and Latinos. You know, a lot of people say the military, it's an alternative to education, and I'd rather send my son and my daughter to college or to a community college or to a GED program and get a job. I'm here to tell you that the Air Force is a pathway to education. The Air Force runs the largest community college in the world, and if you sign up and enlist after your first or second or third term of enlistment, you're highly likely to have an associate's degree, on your way to a bachelor's, and probably by the time you retire, a master or two. You know, we've got a lot of challenges today, and I have a Secretary of the Air Force that's laser focused on data. Several years ago, we undertook a series of what we call our disparity reviews, focused on disparities in discipline and career advancement opportunities. As many of you probably know, the findings and the data laid out something that was common knowledge to many who served, which is that Hispanics were promoted below the average rate to all ranks except for E7. While 8% of the Air Force's officers are Hispanic, only 3% are pilots. And what that means is in our combat arms category, which are overrepresented in general officers, communities of colors, particularly Hispanics and Latinos, are missing out. These reviews spurred real and meaningful change, and they were a wake-up call to the department. If we leave members of our team behind, we can't succeed. So what are we doing about it? That's what I wanted to talk about briefly today. The Department of the Air Force has a number of what we call barrier analysis working groups. Our BOGs act as a sensor field for the force, finding where our policies are not meeting reality on the ground. And I'm so proud today that the leaders of our Hispanic Latino Empowerment and Advancement team, known as the HEAT, are here today. There's a booth downstairs. I'd encourage you to visit them and to talk about what they're doing to build a stronger force. But more importantly, it's not just future stuff. This this sensor field has already created meaningful and impactful change. For one example, they've helped identify root causes of disparities and policies that have disproportionate impacts. To date, we've changed policies to include accent marks on uniform nameplates and name tapes. They've also highlighted some of the incorrect designations of overseas locations like Puerto Rico. So now, airmen of Puerto Rican descent can now visit their family without needing specialized exceptions in a new streamlined process. Bigger picture, the Biden administration, which I represent, has also prioritized changes. We've reinstated a naturalization process during basic military training that enables airmen to be able to take the oath of citizenship right after they take the oath swearing their duty and their allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. This April, we graduated 14 new citizens who took that oath right after basic military training. But there is so much more work that we've got to do. Last year, we updated our applicant pool goals for officers. They hadn't been looked at in over a decade. And as I noted earlier, while Hispanics and Latinos comprise 8% of our officer force, our goals for all sources of commissioning, the U.S. Air Force Academy, ROTC, and Officer Training School, used to be 10% applicant pool. We've upped that now to 15%, and I'm proud and I believe we are going to meet that in the years to come. I wanted to say one serious thing before I highlight our awardees today, and that's many of you are aware of the recent Supreme Court case, Fair versus Harvard, striking down affirmative action. Many of you are also aware that there was a footnote in that opinion that exempted the military service academies. Why did those justices exempt the military service academies? Because they knew, as we all know, that we cannot have a diverse enlisted force led into battle with an officer corps that does not represent them and does not look like America. But as a recovering lawyer, I can tell you, the service academies, and the Air Force Academy in particular, only comprises 25% of our officers. So we now need to reach 75% of colleges and universities that no longer are benefiting from affirmative action programs. So what are we going to do? We have our enhanced Hispanic Serving Institution scholarships for ROTC, currently at 6 HSIs. And if you are a member of JROTC, we have 100 scholarships for you where you can have your entire college education paid for. In closing, we're really here to celebrate the LULAC Award winners, but I want to emphasize that the service we're acknowledging here goes beyond the professional accomplishments in swearing an oath to defend the Constitution. This award is based on their extraordinary achievements in community service, particularly focused on underrepresented populations. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud to represent the Department of Defense. And now let's give out some awards. Thank you.